You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV, series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the latest episode of Star Trek Prodigy called Preludes. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, remember to like The Secrets of Star Trek on our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuest Media. Retweet us on Twitter, where you'll find us at SQPN. You'll find us on Instagram at StarQuest Network. And leave us comments wherever you find us. We love to hear from you. I want to tell you about another show on the network you're sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. You'll find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/secrets. All right, so we're talking about this episode of Prodigy called Preludes. And so, Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
Last time, the kids were stuck with the protostar on a station in the neutral zone, and Ensign Asencia revealed herself to the diviner as a member of his own species. This time, we learn people's backstories. As the kids repair the protostar, they discuss how they got to Tars Lamora. Rok was a professional space wrestler who was paid to be a heel, but she got tired of losing fights to the face that she was pitted against and decided to beat him. Afterward, she was sold into slavery on Tars Lamora. Zero was a member of a Medusan colony on a barren world before he was captured by the Kazon. Jankom Pog was from a pre-Federation, pre-warp teller. As an orphan, he was put in cryosleep on board a deep space mission, but he awoke early when the ship began encountering a series of minor malfunctions. After he repaired them all, he'd used so much oxygen that to save the other sleeping Tellarites on board, he had to jettison himself, at which point he was captured by the Kazon. And on biological Janeway's ship, Ensign Asencia reveals the backstory of the whole series. After the Federation made first contact with her homeworld of Solemn in the future, it caused a civil war, and the Federation refused to take sides. But the protostar came through a temporal anomaly from the past, and the people of Solemn decided to booby-trap it and send it into the past to destroy the Federation and prevent first contact. But before they could do that, Captain Chakotay and the crew escaped and sent the ship back through the time anomaly without a crew. The Solemnites then created the Order, sending back 100 pilots with their own ships and dreadnought robots to find the protostar and ensure its mission would succeed. The diviner was one of these, and Ensign Asencia, known as the Vindicator, was another. These revelations restore the diviner's memories. The diviner arrived 20 years earlier and defied the Order by having Gwyn as his progeny. The Vindicator arrived 3 years ago and infiltrated biological Janeway's crew, since she was also determined to find the protostar. Meanwhile, biological Janeway examines the subspace equivalent of a wanted poster for the unwanted children, and she learns about their prior enslavement on Tars Lamora, and decides that she really needs to seek out the one who put the bounty on the kids, someone called the diviner. But when she goes to check on the diviner, not knowing who he is, she walks in on the Vindicator in her true form, and the diviner knocks out biological Janeway to protect the mission. The end.
So one of the interesting things about this episode, it was written by the entire Star Trek Prodigy writers' room. It's unique for that. Probably because we're getting so much backstory. There's so much of who these characters were before the first episode. So I'm kind of glad they did this, because it fills in a lot of gaps, and it makes it feel like, okay, now we're getting something substantial from this story, because so much of it so far there's been, substantial parts, but there's been, aimed at kids, slapsticky stuff. So now we're kind of getting a substantial part of the story, I think.
And I'm glad they had the whole writing crew write this episode, because it did feel like each little backstory was written just a little bit differently. There's a little bit different, at least to me, it felt like there's a little different, writing language, if you will, for each backstory. So you could tell that it was, one or two of the writers took, each one and were able to do it. And then whoever, the Hegemons or whoever did the glue that kind of the whole story that fit together. So I think that was a good way to do it. And they were very interesting little backstories. I thought they did a very good job on them and kind of getting to know who these characters were and how they ended up where they were.
Yeah.
It was nice to get backstories on everybody, and they did some things that were a little bit subtle that they didn't really point out, but like when Jankom Pog is awoken from cryosleep on the Tellarite spaceship, he's being escorted around to fix these emergencies by a drone.
Mhm.
And the drone is kind of low wattage in the brain power department.
Yeah.
And the drone, in order to respond to him, he has to state his name before whatever he wants to say, or the drone will just tell him, state your name and your request. and otherwise, so he has to constantly say his name to
Right.
the drone, and that without telling us directly, we see him doing this, and that's the backstory to why Jankom Pog always refers to himself in the third person. It's because he had this traumatic experience with the drone where he had to say his name repeatedly in order to get it to work with him.
Could you imagine if you had to do that with the Echo?
Yeah.
Dominic Bettinelli needs you to turn on the lights.
Yeah.
It'd be obnoxious.
Very
Very poorly
it was
programmed.
Siri
And,
misbehaving itself.
And
Yeah.
Alexa is obnoxious enough to begin with.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, and I like that. We also see the subtlety of Jankom Pog starts off admitting, I'm a trainee. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. And we have this montage of him having to fix things,
Mhm.
and eventually, he's now this talented engineer we see on the Protostar, mostly talented. I mean, he does end up fixing most things. So
And I love his first fix is percussive maintenance, which anybody who's done IT work knows that trick well, is making something work by whacking it.
yes. So yes, one of the things interesting too is they start with Janeway, Bio Janeway, in her ready room, listening to Chopin's Prelude No. 4, which is where we get the title of the episode. So that was kind of nice. And yeah, she has names for the faces that she's encountered. They're called the Unwanted. And
Which is a callback to like the very first few episodes,
Yep.
where
Right.
the slaves on Tars Lamora were called the Unwanted. But she now knows all of their names and can identify them by species, except for Dal and Gwen.
right.
And she now understands that they're just victimized kids and they're not the real enemies.
Yes, which is a nice advancement of the story. So we can finally get beyond them running away and being thought of as, the people who stole the ship.
We also, in this opening sequence, have a dilemma that we, the viewer, know the answer to, and that the kids know the answer to, but that Janeway does not, because they're repeatedly hailing. They're on the other side of the neutral zone from the station where the kids are at, and they're repeatedly hailing them and not getting any replies. And we know that that's because the kids can't reply without infecting biological Janeway's ship, so they're staying radio silent.
Yeah, and they're in the meantime they're fixing the ship because remember the Janeway's ship just damaged
She shot it. Yeah.
yeah. So they're trying to fix the proto warp drive so that they can escape when they need to go. And in the midst of all this, Dal is still fuming over this idea that he's a failed genetic experiment from the last episode. And this is what is the seed of the premise of this story, which is everyone gets to tell their background story. Like, Dal, you're not unique. We all have bad stories. This is how we end up as the Unwanted, which is, if you think about it, the Unwanted is such a gaslighting name because this is, the diviner telling them all the time that these slaves that had been, captured, well, you're here because no one wanted you. I mean, it reminds me of some of these old stories like Oliver Twist sort of things. It's like it's an Oliver Twist story where these adult has enslaved these children and tells them, well, you're here because it's your fault because no one wanted you. And
of course we see in the stories that's not the case.
Yeah,
at least for Zero wasn't unwanted. He was captured.
Yep.
Rock in a way wasn't was unwanted only because she stopped playing her part.
Right.
Yeah, her
Things
story,
like that.
by the way, really was one that I enjoyed. It fits her and it explains her personality about how she doesn't like being treated as this, oh, you're the big physical one, so you get to do the big physical things. Because that's what she was required to do when she was a professional space wrestler. And that was her selling point was, I mean, they called her the monster. And she had this regular baby face that she would lose to, who we never get a name for him. He's just called the hero, and he's got a lightsaber that doesn't look like a lightsaber.
Yeah.
You know, it's because it's got like more width to the sword than a lightsaber does typically. But she and as in the wrestling industry, the heels and the faces are all buddies behind the scenes.
Right.
They only pretend to be antagonists. And so she gets along with him great, even though they don't share a language. And so it's nice seeing her relating to the hero, and I suspect we'll see the hero in the future. He's worth bringing back.
That's an interesting idea. Well,
Actually,
and
what I talking about lightsaber, I thought it looked like the dark saber from Mandalore.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing we don't know is how she ended up in gladiatorial combat. Like,
right,
she's a child, even though she's a Brickar who, they're naturally very large, but she's still a child. And how did she end up there? That's still something unknown. We know how Zero ended up on the sleeper ship, and we know how, Zero ended up on a planet. Yeah, and Jankom ended up on the sleeper ship, but we don't know ultimately her origin. And you notice the one story we don't have, and we know how Gwyn got where she is, but the one story we never get still is Dal. We still don't know. I mean, and I feel like that's going to be the big mystery, at least for this season, maybe beyond. It would be interesting to see if they try to take that further into another season.
And clearly Dal doesn't know his background. He doesn't know where he came from. He doesn't know, because he was surprised that he wasn't, part of a race, but he was actually kind of a mix of different DNA.
Right.
Yeah. Dal may know part of how he he may know what happened immediately before he got to Tars Lamora, but he obviously doesn't know his full backstory, or he would have known about the genetic experiment. But I agree. I think Dal's origin is going to be a recurring mystery, and it's going to turn out he's got parents.
Right. Oh, yeah. We do know that he was with the Ferengi for a little bit. Remember that Ferengi that we saw?
That's right.
And you mentioned, Jimmy, at the beginning there, about Murph. We still don't know about Murph. And I have a feeling that Murph's origin is going to be surprising. It's going to be a big deal. So as he continue to go through whatever metamorphosis he's undergoing. And
on the comms outpost, they did mention that that he knew what type of worm, rainbow worm or whatever he was called.
Yeah,
he did mention that. And I'd forgotten about Dal and the Ferengi. So we know that how he got to Tars Lamora is because the Ferengi sold him out, but we don't know beyond that.
Right. And the Ferengi is also the one who sold him out to Diviner with the unwanted bounties.
Yep.
I really liked this.
Tars Lamora must not be very far into the Delta Quadrant.
Right, because there's so many Alpha Quadrant species that ended up there. The quadrants touch, right? They have to. So that's the nature of them. So it's got to be on the near side. Although the Kazon were there, and
they were on the far side of the Delta Quadrant.
I feel like they're kind of papering over this whole idea of how far the Kazon, because the Kazon were also pretty primitive in their technology. They had not been able to travel far. So,
and if we're looking at, at one, they went from the Delta Quadrant to the neutral zone. I haven't looked at the map of how that would work, where that would connect in the Delta Quadrant, because they've got the quantum slipstream drive in the Dauntless. We know that. And of course you got the Protostar drive, which can go even faster, but
right. Yeah. that comm station was on the edge of the Delta Quadrant. So, yeah, Star Trek has never been really great about being consistent with distances of things, how far things are apart, and where they're located.
You mean warp being the speed of plot?
Yes. J.J. Abrams was the worst at it with his movies. I just drove me crazy. It's 15 minutes between Earth and Vulcan. I mean, whatever. It just kind of drove me a little nuts.
Babylon 5 dealt with that problem by having all faster than light travel occur by taking a shortcut through another universe. And if you're taking a shortcut through another universe, its space doesn't have to correspond to space here. So, yeah, Centauri Prime is 5 days from Earth, but if you go this other way, you can get there in 1 day.
Right. It's like Stargates. The gate travel is always more convenient. And then we have like Zero's story, where there wasn't a lot to that story. I mean, she was with her family. She was traveling with them.
Zero's an it, but I think of Zero as a male.
I know. For some reason, at the very beginning of the series, I got it in my head that Zero was a she. Don't know why. And then I keep trying to fix it in my head to be it. But so Zero had a family or community, however that works, that it was traveling with, and was lured away by Kazon. So they specifically targeted Zero for capture.
And they were wearing visors, as they would have to, so they knew about Medusans and how to protect themselves from Medusans in the process of capturing one.
And we know that the Diviner wanted a Medusan.
Yes,
and was testing on it. So that's how Zero ended up being the unlucky one, basically.
Right. Yeah, and delivered to Gwyn. And that's really kind of awkward, isn't it? How Gwyn and Zero are friends now, but their relationship began with Gwyn enslaving Zero, and it's an interesting subtlety to have in a show that is aimed at kids, and I'm glad for it. I'm glad that you have these subtleties, and because to explore this, to have kids exposed to this sort of subtle, complex relationship sort of thing. It's unexpected.
Another kind of thing that I thought they did nicely in terms of sort of unexpected things is, I don't know what to call her now, Essentia or the Vindicator. I find this whole let's give ourselves action names a little pretentious. But Essentia, in recalling the Civil War, notes that the Federation refused to take sides in it. And from their perspective, that would be a bad thing, because that means the Civil War is just going to continue and both sides are going to beat each other up, and it's going to be even worse. But knowing the Federation, yes, that's exactly what they would do. They would refuse to take sides. You guys got yourselves into a civil war. Sorry, Prime Directive. Work it out yourself.
Right. By the way, I'm going to assign myself a new name. I am the Dominator, so you can just call me. Yeah. So.
Not pretentious at all.
Not pretentious at all.
I just hear that's a part of their culture. That's how they rank their warriors. Their generals is by a title. I don't know. One thing they did, the Diviner did say is that the Federation was backwards technologically compared to their race. So I don't know. I don't know. Did they ever really say that the Valnakat were not warp capable when the Federation found them, or?
No, I mean, they did have first contact and did engage with them.
Right.
But the Prime Directive is, I think, it has two levels. There's if they're not warp capable, we don't contact and we don't interfere. Right. But then there's also we also just don't interfere in the internal workings of peoples outside the Federation, except when it's convenient to our plot and politics.
Like
and I think that's
a drug from a planet from another planet that we saw on lower decks.
Right. So I think that's the level we're working at. Is you have you're not part of the Federation yet, and you have your internal disputes, so we're not interfering. Of course, like I said, the Federation often interfered in the Klingons and in the Cardassians and the Romulans, when they were doing bad things, and they were interfering.
They were threats, as opposed to if there's a Klingon civil war, the Federation's instinct is going to be to stay out of that.
Yeah. That's true. And in fact, there were times when they did, in DS9 and TNG, there were internal Klingon conflicts that they were supposed to stay out of and didn't. But that was more a violation of the regulation. But I am glad we got this more backstory on the Val-Nakot. That we got a little bit at the first season break, and now we get more, and that's good because I felt like something was missing for making me care about what's going on, and I need to understand who the diviner is and what he's about for me to really, really care about this story.
I didn't have that experience, but I'm glad we have the backstory now. We also now know where Chakotay is. He and his crew are stranded in the future.
Right, right. So predictions, do you think, is that
I predict we'll find Chakotay in the future.
Okay. Yeah. So they will travel to the future, I would guess. So, and my guess is the Protostar will be the only ship that can do it, to go and come back, is the idea. So we have the order that they talk about, after the Diviners people have destroyed themselves in the Civil War. They're mostly, they don't have much left, but they form this order. I don't think it's a religious order, but more like a order. We would maybe think of it more as a military knights. Yeah, an order of knights. And they're going to organize to stop what the Federation did to them. And like you said, send the Protostar back. Now, they had already armed the construct on the Protostar, and that's when Chakotay and his bird-like first officer is. I wonder if it's from the same people from that episode in Lower Decks or a different bird-like race. But in any case, they sent it back, and sacrificing their own opportunity to go home, which is interesting. But the Janeway hologram on board never knew, which I thought was interesting. She has that gap in her knowledge. Do you think Chakotay erased that?
I would assume it would have been the Solonites. That it was part of you don't want the onboard hologram knowing the plan.
Right.
If you're planning on using the ship to cause havoc.
Right. Okay. That would make sense because remember she didn't even remember the ship being taken over by the Dreadnoks.
Yes, that's true. And it's interesting. The time travel was not the slingshot one that we see a lot of time. It's a wormhole time travel, which is I don't know if that's significant.
The classic Star Trek phrase.
Temporal anomaly. And so
just use the Doctor Who phrase. It's a time storm.
There you go. And then so the Val-Nakot, they come up with a plan to send 100 ships, each with one person. So they only have 100 ships and 100 dreadnoughts left, apparently. And they weren't able to pinpoint where exactly when the ship. They said like a 1% chance. So I guess they're sending 100 ships to 100 possible times to cover their bases.
Yeah, and that's not really how statistics works, but okay.
Yeah, I kind of figured that. They didn't exactly say that. Because they almost implied that they were all going to the same time too. But that as they were going through this,
and also apparently a lot of the 100 are dead because as they were coming back through the wormhole through time, it was collapsing, and a lot of them apparently died in that process.
Maybe it was a 1% chance that one of them would get through. So you sent 100 to maybe have that one go through, and maybe that's what it was.
I think they were supposed to go to the same time as where the Protostar did.
Yeah.
But the chance of where did the Protostar go once it left the temporal anomaly is why they sent so many to spread out. And then of course when it started collapsing, they got knocked. Some got destroyed. Most got destroyed. 2 of them made it through, but they made it through at different times.
I wonder though. This is a convenient future plot device where we have Val-Nakot showing up randomly over the course of the series to be bad guys throughout. That could be interesting. At least maybe one other at least. So the Diviner got there 20 years ago in the past of the present moment of the series. Asencia got thrown back to only 3 years prior. And the diviner must have been injured because that's why he's in that suit, right? To sustain his life. But also got a sense of this is taking so long. I need to have someone to carry on once I'm gone.
And so he had Gwen, which apparently means they reproduce asexually.
Right.
Either that or they store the gametes of the opposite sex in their bodies for a long time.
Right.
I figured it was more of a create the progeny than it was reproduce a progeny.
A cloning type procedure.
Process, yeah.
Yeah. And which is apparently forbidden. Like having these children was maybe, I mean, do you think that's like a Val Nakot thing or an order thing? I mean, like maybe that the order
was an
forbids.
Order thing. I got it that it was an order thing.
Yeah. Like you have to be dedicated entirely. So like a celibacy, you have to dedicate your entire existence to the cause.
Like a Knight Templar.
Right. Yeah. They were celibates too.
Well, I think the idea too was not to leave any trace in the past.
Right.
The idea is they finish their mission and then I would assume commit ritual suicide or something like that, and
or go back to the future or something.
Or go back,
but
or do whatever it takes to stay out of the timeline. It is interesting to the Jankom Pog story that he originates pre-Federation, which is why he keeps harping on this idea that he's Federation royalty, which is kind of funny. But this
he found out very early on that the Tellarites were one of the 4 original founders. Oh, we're royalty.
Yeah, exactly. And so we learned before that he's a runt. He's a runt of the litter in the Tellarite race, and that's in that sense. Which Janeway, Hollow Janeway, by the way, points out that runts are often valued. That her own dog from the Star Trek Voyager, what was the name of I forget the name of the dog, but that she says Molly, that's right, was the runt of the litter, which is something we learned actually in Voyager itself. And
that's what you tell runts.
Runts are the best. Wait a minute. My mom always said I was the best. Never mind. So, and then the Tellarites used orphans to send them on deep space cryostasis missions, which that sounds kind of awful, to be honest.
Yeah. Also, I was pleased that how nicely that dovetailed with Jankom, having this, I'm royalty thing, because that was a genuine discovery to him when he learned what species he was back on the communication station. And he learned that the Tellarites were one of the original founders. And so that was new to him. So it makes sense that he's from a time before that. And that also deepens his character. It's like, this is their Kanunian thing. I mean, he's been around for ages in cryosleep, which makes Jankom a more interesting character. But notice also, if he's an orphan, that explains part of the royalty fantasy he's engaging in, because now I don't know that orphans in real life do this, but at least in literature, orphans would frequently turn out to be lost royalty, and orphans in literature would have, in parodies of 19th century literature, would have fantasies about being lost royalty.
Right. And I like the fact that Jankom turns out to be heroic. I mean, he sacrifices his opportunity to stay with his people, to be, on this ship, and throws himself out into the deep dark of space alone in order to allow the people of the ship to make it to their destination. And it's a nice character moment for Jankom to not just be the usual, comedy relief of the crew, to do something heroic. I like that.
And of course, that's something they could play out later. They could have him remember where they were going, and then the crew goes and finds them.
Yeah, they could. That would be an interesting another story possibility. So at the end, they fixed the proto drive. They're ready to take off, and they don't yet, which is interesting. So we're presumably that's going to be in the next episode. But we then get this scene of Bio Janeway realizing the kids aren't criminals, that they're victims of the diviner, and then going to confront the diviner and walking in on this awkward moment with a dreadnought and a Sensia in a true form and the diviner and getting knocked out. And I'm sitting there going, well, how are they going to explain this when Janeway comes to and they're trying to, and the crew's looking for Admiral Janeway? I'm curious how this is going to get explained and where we're going from here. So that should be interesting. So any other thoughts on this episode, Father Cory?
Nothing here.
Jimmy?
Nope. We've talked about the episode for longer than it was.
Which is a little unusual with the Prodigy lately. But I think it was a good episode. I thought that we really advanced things here. So it wasn't just a throwaway. So that's good. All right. So we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Trek, including Michael C., Warren C., Ricardo G., Mary B., and Charles W. Their generous tax-deductible donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So we'd love to hear what you think of this episode of Star Trek Prodigy called Preludes. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can send an email to trek@sqpn.com or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And you'll find this as a full video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We should also make sure to subscribe. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next episode of Prodigy called Ghost in the Machine. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, and live logs and proper.
And Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thank you, and Jankom Pog, finally relax.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest, and remember, Jankom Pog can fix it.